This is a time of year where we feel the juxtaposition of a holiday as ancient as our people's identity itself, that of Passover, going back thousands of years to Yetziat Mitzrayim, with the custom that's been part of our tradition for over 2,000 years of developing a Seder lehagid, to tell the story of Pesach. But Passover is also followed in quick succession by several commemorations, some tragic and some joyous, that also reflect a part of our history as Jews and as a people, albeit far more modern and even yet in our memories. Included within those commemorations is that of Yom Hashoah, Holocaust Commemoration Day, which we begin commemorating tomorrow. This Shabbat is our opportunity to remember and to commemorate those people who, amongst our people, who are still here, who survived the Shoah, who survived the Holocaust. And we are only beginning to decide in liturgical and other ways how we will remember Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut within 2 generations of the event itself. And of course, one of the best ways is lehagid, to tell the story. And we're fortunate this morning that Jennifer Zunikoff, who is a regular presence here at Beth Israel and has regaled us and moved us with so many of her own stories over the years, will tell us a little bit about the class. And we've had the opportunity to have a different set, but students who have begun that process of memory and lehagid, of telling the story. So, Jennifer?
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I'm very privileged because the past 10 years I have been able to co-teach a course along with Dr. Utalarki and Dr. Steven Salzberg, a course at Goucher College. And this course is called Oral History of Holocaust Survivors. We have had 109 students take this course over 10 years. We have had more than 30 survivors participating and a liberator. And our students have interviewed in small groups each of these survivors. 3 students would go to their homes. They would interview them the first time about their lives before the war, the second time about their lives during the war, and the third time about their lives after the war, from liberation until today. And the students have learned so much. Thousands and thousands of people have heard these stories, have looked into the eyes of young people. Sometimes these young people were the age of the survivors when these horrible tragedies were happening. And they are getting to know that these stories will be passed on. I call this time a fragile window. The window is still open. We are still so blessed to be here in our world, in our time, with survivors who can tell us directly of the stories that happen. Not only the tragedy, though we must hear the tragedy, and we must hear it again and again, but we also must hear about the lives before the war, the whole world that is gone. We must hear it straight from the mouths from those who lived in that world before it was taken from them. And we must hear about how they went on with their lives. The tragedy, of course, never leaving them, but the story of their lives continued. And so that story continues with these young people. We have 3 of them here today. We have Gabrielle Spear, we have Justine Ruhlin, and we have Serena Shapero. Gabrielle and Justine were in the class in 2012. Here it is 2 years later. Their wonderful grades have long been turned in, and yet they are still telling. Serena Shapero has long since graduated from Goucher. She works now in the Jewish community. She graduated but she participated in the class in 2008. And she is still here telling the story. She is going to tell you the story of Golda Kalib. Justine is going to tell you the story of Howard Kadinow. And Gabrielle is going to tell you the story of Rivka Pancerman. Are they going to tell you their whole story? No. They cannot, because they are not the survivors. And they cannot because in 8 minutes, 6 minutes, what can they tell? They can tell the pieces that really touch them. They can open your hearts to want to learn more of these stories. Rivka Pancerman is here with her family, with her daughters and her cousin. And we are so blessed that she is here and they are here. I'm not sure if Howard and his wife are here. Howard Kadinow is going to be, we're going to hear his story. His wife, Esther, was also interviewed by our class in 2009. And Golda is not here, but she is here in spirit. And Serena is going to see Golda on Tuesday when Golda tells her story at a Jewish Community Services program. So we keep learning from each other. And so now I would like to introduce Justine, our first teller, and she will introduce the next student. Thank you for your listening.
Good morning. My name is Justine Ruhlin, and I'm a history major, German minor, studying at Goucher College. And 2 years ago, I had the honor and privilege of meeting and interviewing Howard Kadinow. Today, I have constructed a story as it occurred to me when I was learning his story. After every interview, I called my own mother, and I retold her exactly what Howard had just told me. And so today, when I present my story, I'll be speaking to her on the phone, but I'll also be speaking as Howard in first person. Hi, Mom. No, I'm just getting home. I just got back from Howard's house. Well, last time I learned about Howard's life before the war, and today I learned about what happened during the war. And, well, no. Howard wasn't a camp survivor. Howard was a partisan fighter. He was living in Belarus, the Polish border area. Well, his story just reopened these feelings. Don't you remember when I had visited Auschwitz last summer, in June? How angry and frustrated I was. I told you about that couple that was standing under the Arbeit macht frei gate, taking pictures of one another. Or those teenagers that were listening to their iPods and laughing at the sight. Howard's story reopened those feelings today. I witnessed him relive his own tragedy. And his story is something I will never forget. On April 28th, 1943, my brother Yehuda came running down the street, screaming, "They're coming! They're coming to take our men!" He ran into the house with tears running down his face. But my mother, she was so calm and collected. "Don't worry, it's fine, come with me." So she took my brother, myself, and my grandfather out to the barn behind the house. She took us inside and she hid us where wet hay dries above a trough. "Everything will be fine." She went back into the house, and then I heard them coming. The boots grinding into the gravel of the street, stomping up our steps, slamming open the screen door. I heard her, "No, no one's here, no one's here." She began to whimper and cry, and they called her names and cursed at her. And then I heard the sound of a fist strike that sweet, soft cheek of my mother's face. And then I heard a shot. And then I didn't hear anything. I can't imagine losing you like that, Mom. I can't imagine anyone surviving something like that. And to later find out that his father, that very day, had been rounded up with other Jewish men in the town, pushed into a building, locked inside, and then burned alive. There had been this story that before being pushed into the building, his father had managed to grab a gun and kill one of those men, the members of the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads, only to be pushed back into the building. Howard remained in hiding for 4 days with his brother and grandfather, but they knew that group was still there, looking for anyone also hiding. And so they went to the nearby village where his aunt and uncle were. And his uncle was the president of the Judenrat. And I don't know if you know what the Judenrat is, Mom, but it's the Jewish council. And it was established by the Nazis to destroy the Jewish community from within. The members of the Judenrat were forced to decide who would go on the next transport, who would live, who would die. He was there and hiding in a false wall with many cousins and uncles. But they knew that this Einsatzgruppe would be coming, and they couldn't stay there any longer. The night we decided to leave was a terrible night to escape. The moon was so full and so bright that everything was illuminated. But we couldn't stay. And so we crawled on our bellies, and we clung to the walls, and we hid in the shadows until we reached the woods. And the woods became my home for the next 2 years. I stumbled around on my own for several weeks until I ran into the Commissar Brigade, a Russian Jewish partisan group working to fight the Germans. I begged and pleaded, please, can I be a part of this? You're too small and you're too weak. What use are you? I begged and pleaded, I'll do anything to kill a German. And so they let me in. I watched over my partisan brethren as they laid down dynamite against German train tracks. I hid in ditches, and I slung rocks at officers going by. I read the daily news to my partisan brothers every morning and every evening. I was even given an AK-47, and I used it. You don't know how lucky you are. You don't know what it's like to be in the war. I hope you never do. You live in the greatest country in the world. You have nothing but opportunity and freedom before you. Don't forget that. Thank you. I would like to introduce the next speaker, Serena. Sorry.
Hello, everybody. My name is Serena Shapero, and I graduated from Goucher in 2011 and got to be a part of this class, as Jennifer said, in 2008, and I'm still telling Golda's story today. I had the pleasure to interview Golda Kalib, and I'm very honored to be here today to share it with all of you. I was 6 years old, living in Bodzentin, Poland. It was January 1937, and I was so excited. My family always went to this cabin in the woods, and it was snowing outside, and my mother gave me this huge fur coat to wear. And I had all my toys with me and all of my dolls. And I remember we got in the horse and buggy, and it was just a couple miles to get to the cabin. And I remember riding in the horse and buggy with my sisters and my brothers and my mom and dad. And I was looking out, and I could see the sun glistening on the snow. And it looked so magical. And I just couldn't wait. This was my absolute favorite place to go. And I was going to get to be there with my family. And I felt so safe. I always just felt so safe whenever we went there. I was 13 years old, and I was in Auschwitz, and I got really, really sick. I mean, I could barely stand up. My stomach hurt so badly, and I had this high fever. And surprisingly, they had a hospital in Auschwitz where children could go. And I went there, and I was amazed. There were white walls, and the sheets were clean, and they gave me white bread to eat. And they were doing all these tests on me. They kept putting needles in my arm, and I actually developed this huge abscess on my left arm because they kept doing all these experiments. And I remember there was this one room that they took children to, and when the children were too sick, this truck would come every morning to take the children to the crematorium. And I was sick, but I wasn't stupid. I knew what room that was. About 3 days later, in the middle of the night, they brought me into that room. And I remember that morning hearing the truck come down the gravel road. And I have to tell you, I don't know what came over me, but I just started sweating profusely, and I jumped up on the bed, and I said, "Coffee, coffee, I need coffee. Where's the nurse? Get me out of here. I need coffee. I'm fine. Get me out of here." And the nurse came running in, and she felt my forehead, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she picked me up, and she ran me out of the room. And that nurse, she saved my life. If it wasn't for her, I would have died. It was January 18th, 1945, and I was with my mother, who was very sick at the time, and my sister Irena, and we were going on what they now call a death march, but we were walking, and they didn't tell us where we were going or how long we'd be gone for. And it was freezing outside. There was snow everywhere. And my feet were raw. They were raw and bleeding because it was so cold. And I remember looking at the snow that was on the ground with the sunlight on it like I did when I was a little girl, except now the snow was covered in blood from all the gunshots. You see, if anyone went out of the line or stepped out of turn, they would get killed. So I was holding up my mother, and my sister Irena was on the other side, and we were walking, and all of a sudden Irena just fell on the ground, and she just said, "I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore." And I looked at her, and I said, "You can walk, and you will walk." And I picked her up, and I put her arm over my mother's, and we just kept walking. And I have to tell you, we didn't have any hope at that point, yet we knew somehow we had to survive. I was 18 years old, and I was going to Baltimore for the first time. And I was on the train with my sister, Irena, and I didn't speak much English at this time. But we were in the corridor, and it was really crowded, and I really had to use the restroom, and the restroom was on the other side of the corridor, and there were a lot of people standing in the way, and I had to find a way to ask them to move so I could get to the bathroom. And so I asked Irena, I said, "Irena, how do you say, please move out of my way, please give me some space?" And she said, "You say, 'excuse me.'" And I said, "Okay, excuse me." So there was this gentleman standing up, and I just go up and I tap him on the shoulder, and I said, "Excuse me." And he just moved. He just moved out of the way. No one had listened to my voice in years. And he just let me go through. And I have to tell you, that was really the first time that I knew I could make it here. That was really the first time that I knew I'd be okay. Thank you. And here's Gabby.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle Spear, and I'm an English major and Peace Studies minor at Goucher College. 2 years ago, I had the unbelievable privilege of interviewing Rivka Pancerman, who is here with us today. And last year, I studied abroad in Rwanda and stayed with a host family who were genocide survivors. I will be intertwining the story of these two amazing women for you today. I'll be telling Rivka's story in first person, from her perspective, and from my perspective through poetry. We had just finished our first interview. The camera was shut off, and we were all gathered around Rivka's kitchen table when Rivka said, "You are good girls, beautiful girls, but you shouldn't have to hear my story." Before Rivka, I had been baking my own cookie-cutter version of the Holocaust. Annexed by letters to a friend named Kitty, I numbered and plucked stars from the night sky, collecting them in my pocket the way a book thief treasures stories. Unlocking the past with Sarah's key, I was the boy in the striped pajamas, a name scribbled on Schindler's List. I knew that life was and is beautiful. And yet, brick by brick, I had been building monuments out of single memories. My monuments tumbled when I met Rivka. I know now that each recipe produced disaster. Pain cannot be measured in spoonfuls. Loss does not come by the gallon. With each bite, the taste of suffering still lingers in our mouths. The war had come to the city of Lida, Poland, and there were bombs falling everywhere from the sky. I was running as fast as I could when suddenly I stopped and I looked back and I saw that the sky was on fire. There was smoke and fire everywhere. And I thought, how can I run through fire? I will burn. So I kept running farther and farther away from the flames. But as I was running, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was on wings. Eat, she says, as we sit down and listen to her story of years spent in hunger. She's made us popcorn again. I come hungry for words, hungry for stories. My father used to say, if they throw you a stone, throw them back bread. Eat, she says again. We motion for her to join our humble feast. I'm not hungry. Even though as she speaks, she's already back in Russia with a cave for a stomach. Hungry for sweet potatoes, for warmth, for family. Take it with you, she says, handing us bags of popcorn. It's as if we are eating history. Her story. Last semester, I studied abroad in Rwanda, a country ravaged by a genocide 20 years ago this month. While in Rwanda, I stayed with a host family. My host mom's name is Teddy. To the rest of the world, Teddy is a member of the Tutsi tribe and a genocide survivor. But to me, she is just Mama. One night before dinner, Mama and I were sitting around the kitchen table, just the two of us. And she was eating popcorn which just happens to be her favorite snack. She offered me a piece, and I smiled and refused, because in that instant, it felt like Rivka was there with me, offering me a piece of popcorn and sitting next to Mama and I. There were so many things that I wanted to tell Mama in that instant about the Holocaust, about Rivka, about what it feels like to watch history repeat itself in the strangest ways, and what it feels like to be loved unconditionally by a mother who was not your own. I may never know Mama's story the way I know Rivka's. I don't speak Kinyarwanda, and Mama does not speak English. But I can tell you that she makes the best French fries in the entire world. And she hates dancing, but loves it when I dance. She adores her 4 beautiful children. And my favorite part of the day is when she would lay in bed with me and hold my hand. Sometimes I think she can love so much because she has lost so much. Rivka measures her life in thank you notes now, in challah bread given to others. I did it as mitzvah, she says. Mama's body, once struck down by history's sorrows, is still as strong as iron. She has moved 1,000 hills to be with us today. Family names are living monuments to extinguished candles. Lost memories are pieced together like popcorn on a string. Their yesterdays must live within our tomorrows. Their candles must burn within our hearts. I was lighting a candle in remembrance of my parents who had died in Poland during the war when my daughter came up to me and she said, "Mommy, who do we know who has died? I don't know anyone who has died." And I couldn't tell her that these candles were for her grandparents. Can you imagine? I couldn't even begin to tell her the story behind the candle. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena. Thank you, Justine. Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, Rivka, and your daughters and your cousin for being here. Vera Kestenberg is also here, who's an active member of your community, who was interviewed in our class several years ago and has many people telling her story. Her husband, Felix Kestenberg, may he rest in peace, also has many people telling his story, who first heard it as part of our course. Thank you to people from Chavrei Tzedek who came today. Thank you to all of you who are here. You are now the witnesses of the witnesses. Please keep telling the stories. I think we're in good hands with these 3. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Wow, how moving and creative and important it is, not only that our survivors have been willing to share their painful and inspirational stories, but that we have Jennifer Zunikoff and others like her throughout the country that have helped many young people in their own very unique ways, tell the stories, as Serena and Gabby and Justine did for us this morning, and that we feel a certain sense of gratefulness that you continue to tell those stories, and a sense that their stories will live on as important as they are for our history, for their individual history, and for our collective lives as Jews in remembering, as we do this week, Yom HaShoah. We continue with the Chatzi Kaddish of the Musaf service page